Lin Dong gazed at the girl retreating from the stage, his expression unchanging, though a hint of embarrassment stirred inside him. In front of so many people, he'd used the guqin to give her a solid smack on the backside. Who knew how Huan would react to this? Lifting his head, Lin Dong felt the sharp, piercing gazes coming from all around him. He couldn't help but touch his nose, realizing he'd managed to provoke public outrage this time. A Dao sect steward descended from the sky and landed in the arena. He cast a strange look at Lin Dong before loudly announcing, "Lin Dong wins." Boo. However, as soon as his voice fell, a chorus of boos erupted from the crowd. The steward could only smile wryly and shake his head in resignation. Yet, when he glanced at Lin Dong, there was a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. He chuckled quietly and said in a voice only Lin Dong could hear, "Kid, you're pretty bold, hitting that little miss like that." Lin Dong laughed awkwardly, cupping his hands in salute to the steward before stepping off the stage and returning to the area where the Wild Hall disciples were gathered. As Lin Dong landed, he noticed even the disciples of Wild Hall were giving him strange looks. Just as he was about to ignore them, Zhang Hao and the others rushed over, giving him a series of thumbs up, their faces filled with knowing smirks that only men could understand. "Junior brother Lin Dong, you're the first person in all these years who dared to treat little sister Huan like that. It seems that little demoness, who's been terrorizing Dao sect for years, can only be subdued by you." Zhang Hao teased. "But don't worry, all of us from Wild Hall fully support you." Lin Dong was caught off guard for a moment before he glared at the group of grinning Wild Hall disciples and snapped, "Get lost?" Meanwhile, Huan had returned to the Heaven Hall area. Her delicate face was still flushed red, a mix of shame and anger filling her bright, watery eyes. The disciples of Heaven Hall were visibly outraged. After all, Huan was the most popular person among them, admired by countless disciples. Lin Dong's earlier behavior had clearly united them in shared indignation. Just as Huan was still somewhat dazed by the earlier incident, a soft chuckle sounded beside her. She quickly looked up and saw Xiao staring at her with a playful grin. "Sister, that guy treated me like this, and not only are you not helping, but you're even laughing at me." Huan, already flustered, grew even angrier upon seeing Xiao's amused expression. "Well, that's what you get for resisting unnecessarily. Lin Dong didn't want to hurt you, that's why he did it," Xiao replied with a smile. "But he still shouldn't have." Huan trailed off, unable to continue, her face turning an even deeper shade of red, like a ripe apple, making one want to take a bite. That guy was indeed a bit lacking in chivalry. "If I run into him later, I'll get justice for you," Xiao said, patting her sister's head. But the mischievous glint in her slightly narrowed eyes suggested otherwise. "That guy is so infuriating. How am I supposed to face anyone after this?" Huan bit her lip in frustration, casting a venomous glance toward the Wild Hall disciples. She soon locked eyes with Lin Dong, who was standing at the front of the group. As her gaze fell upon him, he seemed to sense it and turned to meet her eyes. Their gazes met for only a few seconds. Lin Dong's expression remained calm, as if nothing had happened. Huan, however, clearly did not possess his thick skin. She quickly averted her eyes, mumbling curses under her breath like a wronged little girl, all while her thoughts were filled with the earlier scene. The spot where she'd been hit still seemed to burn, and her mind drifted back to the time when she had stayed behind to block Yao Ling and the others. In that moment of despair, that lean figure had appeared in front of her. Back then, she had felt that this silhouette was as towering and dependable as her father, whom she had always admired. Lin Dong had accomplished many things that Dao sect disciples considered miracles. Even the most terrifying great wilderness scripture had been successfully mastered by him, something even her elder sister had failed at. Yet, this guy had managed to trample over it. Huan found it hard to believe that the man she once thought was all talk had such frightening abilities. At this rate, perhaps in just another year, Lin Dong would become the #1 disciple of Dao sect's younger generation. At that time, even Xiao and senior brother Wang Yin, whom she had once admired, might struggle to catch up. Her expression shifted between various emotions, her large, beautiful eyes flickering with a trace of confusion and something else, something she herself hadn't yet noticed. Beside her, EngSubs watched her younger sister's reactions and smiled faintly. It seemed the carefree days EngHuan had enjoyed in Dao sect might soon come to an end. Not far away, in the Earth Hall Disciples area, the tall figure of Qing Yi stood at the front. He had also just easily won his match, but his face did not show any joy. Instead, a faint anger flickered within him. The source of his anger was none other than the earlier match between Lindong and EngHuan. Ever since EngHuan returned to the Heaven Hall area, his gaze had been locked onto her. The constant changes in her flushed face made the sensitive Qing Yi feel uneasy. He and EngHuan, Lindong. Qing Ye's eyes darkened as he looked at Lindong from afar, his hand involuntarily clenching into a fist. I hope you don't face me in the upcoming match. Otherwise, I will end your miracle in Dao sect. Lindong stood calmly among the Wild Hall disciples, completely unfazed by the various looks being shot his way from all directions. Clearly, his ability to keep a straight face was impressive, but his composure didn't last long. He soon felt a piercing gaze that made his hair stand on end. Turning his head, he saw EngShuanzi, the Dao sect master, seated in the central area, giving him a half-amused, half-reproachful look. The moment Lindong noticed this, even his usually thick skin began to itch. Smacking someone's daughter in front of so many people was hard to justify. And now, facing the profound and mysterious sect master of Dao sect, even Lindong, usually so composed, felt a little nervous. After all, he had been a bit reckless earlier. Fortunately, EngShuanzi did not continue staring at Lindong for long. After a moment, his gaze shifted elsewhere, allowing Lindong to breathe a sigh of relief. However, Lindong couldn't help but feel a bit frustrated. Out of so many competitors, why was his match the one that became so complicated? Wang Yin has won again. Just as Lindong was relaxing, Pang Tong's solemn voice suddenly sounded beside him. Lindong's eyebrow twitched, and he looked toward one of the nearby arenas. There, Wang Yin, dressed in a gray robe, had already turned and was leaving. In front of him stood a pale-faced disciple from the Flood Hall. However, that disciple's expression was filled with helplessness and bitterness. In the presence of Wang Yin, he hadn't even had the courage to fight. Another one who surrendered before the fight even started. Pang Tong shook his head with a wry smile. In Wang Yin's 3 matches so far, all his opponents had surrendered without fighting, clearly overwhelmed by his intimidating aura. As expected of someone ranked second on the sect's most wanted list, to win without fighting is something only senior brother Wang Yin could achieve among the Dao sect disciples. Jiang Hao sighed. Lindong interlaced his fingers, his gaze drifting to Wang Yin, who had already sat down again, eyes closed in meditation. Then he glanced at EngSubs, whose expression was less than pleasant, though Lindong could still see a glint of determination in her eyes. Is she planning to fight him? Lindong pressed his lips together. He could sense that if those two fought, it would be a true clash of titans. However, who would emerge victorious would depend on their respective abilities. In the following matches, Lindong stepped into the arena twice more. Both of his opponents were top disciples from the Heaven Hall, each quite formidable. Yet in the end, they still fell at Lindong's hands. With 3 consecutive victories, Lindong smoothly advanced to the hall competition finals. By this point, the remaining disciples were all among the top tiers of the 4 halls, and the upcoming matches were far more attention-grabbing than the previous ones. As another round concluded amidst cheers, a steward flew into the arena. His gaze swept over the crowd before his voice rang out. The next match, Qing Yi from Earth Hall. He paused for a moment, then looked toward the Wild Hall area. Versus Lindong from Wild Hall. The moment the words left his mouth, the crowd erupted. The excitement boiled over as the 2 top disciples from their respective halls were finally going to face off. The uproar spread quickly across the mountaintop, and in an instant, countless heated gazes locked onto Lindong and Qing Ye's areas. Both fighters held high reputations within the Dao sect. Qing Yi was undoubtedly the #1 disciple of Earth Hall, and among the younger generation of the sect, he was regarded as second only to EngSubs. His talent was beyond question. Similarly, although Lindong's experience within the Dao sect was not as long as Qing Ye's, his accomplishments over the recent period had made everyone forget that he was once a newcomer. His success in mastering the great wilderness scripture had firmly established him as the top disciple of Wild Hall. Even Pang Tong and the others had no objections to this title. Both of them were top-tier figures among the younger generation of Dao sect, and their duel represented the highest-level clash between the two halls. It might even decide the final ranking of the halls in this competition. As for who would win, everyone present was intensely curious. Over at the Earth Hall, Qing Yi stood with his hands behind his back, his expression calm but his eyes dark. If he could end Lindong's miraculous run here, perhaps Lindong would no longer have anything to do with Huan in the future. Senior brother Qing Yi, go for it. The Earth Hall disciples behind him were visibly excited, shouting out encouragement. Although Lindong's reputation had risen dramatically within the Dao sect recently, the Earth Hall disciples clearly had more confidence in Qing Yi. Qing Yi smiled faintly. With a flicker of his body, he appeared on the stage. His gaze immediately turned toward Lindong. Junior brother Lindong, this will be a tough fight. As far as I know, Qing Yi tried to break through the 9th Nirvana calamity before the hall competition. Although he failed, his strength far exceeds the peak of the 8th Nirvana stage. Moreover, he has successfully cultivated one of the 4 great mystical scriptures, the earthly sovereign scripture. His combat ability is extraordinary. You must be careful, Pang Tong said solemnly, watching Qing Yi on the stage and then turning to Lindong. Understood. Lindong nodded slightly. He knew that Qing Yi was not an opponent to be taken lightly. In terms of combat strength, Qing Yi was far stronger than Hua Zhun from Hongya Cavern. Even Lindong could not afford to underestimate him. Senior brother Lindong, it's all up to you. We Wild Hall disciples are behind you. The surrounding Wild Hall disciples shouted excitedly. Lindong had become the symbol of their hall, and this match was crucial in determining whether Wild Hall could finally hold its head high. In previous years, Wild Hall had always finished last in the hall competition. This record had naturally drawn ridicule, and although the Wild Hall disciples were furious, there was little they could do. The great wilderness scripture, while hailed as Dao sect's most powerful martial art, was so difficult to master that it was practically a decoration. Without mastery, no matter how strong it was useless. This had led to the top Wild Hall disciples suffering significant disadvantages compared to those from the other 3 halls, who had mastered the 4 great mystical scriptures. As a result, Wild Hall had consistently ranked last, a bitter but inescapable fate. However, Lindong's appearance had broken this deadlock. His successful mastery of the great wilderness scripture had reinvigorated the spirits of all Wild Hall disciples, giving them newfound confidence in competing for the top ranks. Feeling the eager gazes around him, Lindong exhaled slowly. He smiled and nodded at Pang Tong and the others before his figure blurred, darting onto the stage amidst the intense stares of the crowd. On the stage, the 2 figures stood facing each other, their gazes locking, sparks flying between them. Although they hadn't yet made a move, the surrounding primordial energy had already begun to stir and boil. At this moment, this stage had become the focal point of the entire event. Even EngShuanzi and the 4 hall masters on the high platform had shifted their attention here. Sister, who do you think has the better chance of winning? Huan, now recovered from her earlier embarrassment, couldn't help but ask as she gazed at the 2 formidable opponents. It's hard to say. EngSubs' eyes also held a trace of seriousness as she stared at the 2 figures on the stage. Although Lindong has mastered the great wilderness scripture, his foundation isn't as strong as Qing Ye's. The latter, despite failing to pass the 9th Nirvana calamity recently, is far stronger than a typical peak 8th Nirvana stage expert. Additionally, while Lindong has the great wilderness scripture, Qing Yi also has the earthly sovereign scripture. It's too early to determine who will come out on top. But, who do you want to win? EngSubs suddenly asked with a teasing smile, her gaze fixed on Huan. Huan was momentarily stunned by the unexpected question. In the past, given her good relationship with Qing Yi, she would have naturally leaned toward him. After all, They had known each other for many years, and their relationship was closer than that of ordinary friends. But now, she realized that she couldn't give a clear answer as quickly as she used to. Even though she was still furious about Lin Dong's earlier actions, in this moment, she found that she didn't have the strong desire to see Lin Dong lose as she might have expected. I don't know, she replied, her eyes flickering evasively. EngSubs glanced at her younger sister, a meaningful look in her eyes, but she didn't press further. Instead, she simply said, "Then just watch. There will be a winner in the end. You didn't disappoint me after all. I originally thought you wouldn't make it this far." On the wide stage, under the gaze of countless onlookers, Qingyi stared calmly at Lin Dong, speaking in a detached tone. Lin Dong frowned slightly at Qingyi's words. He knew that because of Huan, Qingyi harbored some animosity toward him. However, he hadn't expected it to be this intense. "Thank you, senior brother Qingyi, for your concern. But I don't think my progress will stop here," Lin Dong responded, deciding there was no need for politeness since Qingyi's words were clearly laced with hostility. "Heh, that might not be for you to decide." Qingyi smiled faintly, but a sharp glint flickered in his eyes. He stepped forward, and a surge of energy far more powerful than that of Huazhen from Hongya Cavern erupted from his body like a flood. "Lin Dong, if you lose this match, stay away from Huan in the future." The oppressive aura gathered and enveloped Lin Dong. At the same time, Qingyi's lips moved, sending a barely audible message into Lin Dong's ears. Lin Dong's frown deepened as he stared at Qingyi and said slowly, "First of all, let me clarify that Huan and I are just friends. Secondly, if this is how you show affection for someone, I must say it's rather disappointing." Qingyi's face flushed with alternating shades of pale and green at Lin Dong's words. After a moment, anger surged in his eyes, and he growled in a low voice. "I don't need you to tell me what to do. Since you refuse to listen, don't blame me for ending your so-called miracle here." Lin Dong shook his head. It seemed Qingyi had developed quite the infatuation with Huan, but his approach was rather extreme. Given Qingyi's current state, any further words would be futile. Lin Dong sighed, exhaling slowly. Intense green light surged from his body, and faint scales resembling those of a dragon appeared on his skin. "Begin." A steward hovering in midair above the stage nodded at their readiness and called out in a low voice, signaling the start of the match. "I gave you a chance, but you didn't take it. Now, I'll make you retreat in defeat, and I'll do it right in front of her." As Qingyi's voice fell, his expression darkened. With a swift movement, he clenched his fist, and a vast surge of primordial energy burst forth from his body. His figure instantly blurred, reappearing in front of Lin Dong, his powerful fist slicing through the air with terrifying force as it aimed directly at Lin Dong. The tense atmosphere in the arena finally erupted at this moment. The ferocious force from Qingyi's punch formed a swirling vortex, the sound of tearing wind piercing the air, even distorting the space around it. From the moment Qingyi made his move, it was clear his strength far exceeded that of Huazhen. As the powerful punch rapidly approached, Lin Dong's pupils contracted. In the next instant, brilliant green light erupted from his body, forming a shield of emerald scales in front of him, about the size of a small shield. Clang! Qingyi's fist smashed into the emerald scale shield with overwhelming force, sending ripples of power surging forth. The shield was pushed back by the impact, the force driving it closer to Lin Dong's face. Buzz! Just as the shield was about to be forced back completely, it suddenly solidified, blocking the remaining power of Qingyi's punch. Seeing this, a cold glint flashed in Qingyi's eyes. The energy condensed in his palm surged forward like a sharp arrow, piercing through the shield at lightning speed, heading straight for Lin Dong's face. Swish! At that critical moment, Lin Dong's green dragon arm shifted across, intercepting the attack. The icy cold dragon scales absorbed the brunt of Qingyi's attack, neutralizing it. With the dragon arm now in play, Lin Dong didn't slow down. His footwork advanced swiftly, and both of his hands shot forward like the claws of a green dragon, fingers glowing with a fierce light as they pierced through the air, striking directly at Qingyi's vital points. Humph! Qingyi showed no fear in the face of Lin Dong's ferocious attack. Instead, he let out a low growl. His hand movements became a blur, and an immense yellow force surged from his body. I know you've trained in a powerful body-strengthening martial art, but I wonder how it compares to the strongest body cultivation technique of our Earth Hall. As the thick, yellow primordial energy surged through Qing Ye's body, his skin began to take on the color of the earth, steady and unyielding. Earth origin mystic body. With a low shout, the deep yellow light rapidly spread across Qing Ye's body, transforming him into a figure resembling a clay warrior. A terrifying aura radiated from him. His body transformed. Qingyi stepped forward again. His 10 fingers shot out like spears, launching a barrage of attacks to meet Lin Dong's dragon claw strikes head-on. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of tearing wind and explosive impacts echoed continuously from their clash. Sharp waves of energy spilled out from the battlefield, riddling the ground with holes, leaving it looking like a honeycomb. Around the stage, everyone's eyes were glued to the intense battle. The powerful energy waves emanating from the fight sent chills down many spines. They knew that if they were in the same situation, even defending with all their might, they would have been riddled with wounds by now. Who would have thought that Qingyi has mastered Earth Hall's strongest body cultivation technique, the Earth Origin Mystic Body? Pang Tong and the others from Wild Hall watched the fierce battle with grave expressions, unable to hold back their amazement. Lin Dong's advantage lies in his physical strength, but now that Qingyi has activated the Earth Origin Mystic Body, that advantage has been cut in half. Zhang Hao said solemnly, "This match won't be easy." Qing Ye's title as Earth Hall's top disciple is certainly well-deserved. Junior brother Lin Dong has truly met a formidable opponent. The ferocious dragon fist clashed violently with the deep yellow fist, their opposing forces tearing through the air. In the next moment, a thunderous, deafening sound echoed through the arena, and a visible shockwave rippled outward in a circular pattern, causing the ground to split apart with cracks as wide as an arm. Both fists struck and quickly withdrew, and the two fighters were simultaneously forced back several steps by the sheer force of the collision. Every step they took left deep imprints in the ground, while the air behind them rumbled with the force of the impact, producing sonic booms. Though the exchange was brief, the intensity of the confrontation was obvious to anyone with keen eyes. In battles between such powerful opponents, a single mistake could expose a fatal weakness, leading to a decisive outcome. Victory or defeat could be determined in an instant. Qingyi licked his lips, the coldness in his eyes deepening with a hint of seriousness. The earlier clash had ended in a draw. It was astonishing, given that Lin Dong's true strength was only at the 6th Nirvana stage, a significant gap from Qing Ye's level. Yet, despite this, Lin Dong had held his ground in direct combat. Even Qingyi, who harbored personal grievances against Lin Dong, couldn't deny the latter's resilience. If Lin Dong were on the same level as him, Qingyi mused, he would likely have very little chance of winning today. But, as luck would have it, the world was never truly fair. Qingyi exhaled a deep yellow breath. His face, now tinted with the yellow hue of his body cultivation martial arts, flickered with a glow. His hand seals shifted rapidly, and in the next instant, he bent down, pressing his palm heavily against the ground. Buzz. The moment Qing Ye's palm touched the earth, the entire arena began to tremble. A violent force seemed to stir from beneath the ground, like a ferocious beast waiting to burst forth. What's this? Around the arena, numerous shocked gazes focused on the trembling platform. Some spectators recognized the technique, and soon, astonished whispers began to spread through the crowd. Earth Core Heaven Hand? That's the second most powerful offensive martial art in Earth Hall, right after the Earthly Sovereign Scripture. I can't believe senior brother Qingyi mastered it. Lin Dong is in serious danger. It's too early to tell. Lin Dong hasn't used the Great Wilderness Scripture yet. We can't make any conclusions just yet. True enough. The murmuring voices of the crowd rippled across the mountaintop. At this moment, the confrontation between Lin Dong and Qingyi had become the center of attention. Lin Dong also sensed the violent energy building beneath the ground. His expression grew solemn, and in response, his body moved, leaping into the air. Snicker. Qingyi, seeing this, merely sneered. His palm, still pressed against the earth, suddenly clenched into a fist. Boom. The ground trembled violently, and the spot where Lin Dong had just stood collapsed as chunks of earth flew into the air. In the next instant, a massive, deep yellow hand, formed from rocks and primordial energy, shot forth from the earth. The enormous hand, like the claw of a demon emerging from the depths of the earth, tore through the air, releasing a ferocious wind as it charged straight toward Lin Dong. Lin Dong's eyes narrowed as he watched the deep yellow hand rip through the ground, pursuing him relentlessly. He retreated swiftly, but the gigantic hand followed closely behind, its overwhelming energy kicking up a storm of dust and debris. The sight of the hand chasing him through the sky was nothing short of spectacular. In the air, Lin Dong darted like a swift bird, narrowly evading the giant hand's grasp. His maneuvers were so close that they drew gasps from the crowd below. Let's see how long you can dodge. Qing Ye's eyes gleamed with cold light as he clenched his hand. From the massive hand below, dozens of yellow energy beams shot out, sealing off all of Lin Dong's escape routes. Lin Dong's figure suddenly halted in midair. Gazing at the beast-like hand rushing up from below, his brow furrowed. A line of gray appeared between his eyebrows, splitting open to reveal the wild demon eye once again. Buzz. The moment the eye emerged, a surge of desolate energy spread across the sky. The space behind Lin Dong twisted, and a colossal beast, exuding an ancient and wild aura, slowly appeared. The air grew heavy with the energy of the primal wilderness, evoking feelings of deep, ancient desolation that stirred the hearts of many spectators. The wild demon eye. Lin Dong has cultivated it to the point where he can summon a wild spirit, gasped the disciples of Wild Hall, their faces lighting up with excitement and awe as they beheld the massive beast. Standing atop the ancient beast, Lin Dong's eyes turned icy as he watched the yellow hand rush toward him. At that moment, the single eye of the beast behind him slowly opened, and the energy of heaven and earth began to surge wildly. Below, Wang Yin, who had been meditating since his match ended, opened his eyes the moment the ancient beast appeared. A flicker of surprise flashed across his usually indifferent and aloof expression. He actually succeeded in mastering the wild demon eye. Whoosh! The eye of the beast fully opened, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to darken. A terrifying gray beam, filled with destructive power, sliced through the sky like the scythe of death, heading directly toward the yellow giant hand. A thunderous explosion echoed through the sky as the gray beam and the yellow hand collided in a titanic clash of forces. The sky darkened momentarily, and the terrifying energy waves from both sides expanded outward, filling half the sky with gray light and the other half with yellow. On the mountaintop, countless Tao sect disciples watched in awe as the overwhelming energy waves swept across the sky. The sheer force of the collision left them breathless. EngShao and EngHuan stared intently at the sky, their expressions tinged with seriousness. The ferocity of Lin Dong and Qing Ye's battle had exceeded their expectations. As expected of the wild demon eye, Wang Yin muttered to himself as he gazed at the chaotic sky, his eyes narrowing slightly. Bang! As Wang Yin's words fell, the stalemate in the sky was suddenly broken. The gray light surged downward with terrifying destructive force, and the yellow giant hand began to crack under the pressure. In a resounding explosion, the hand shattered into countless pieces of dust. Whoosh whoosh! As the yellow hand disintegrated, the massive gray beam split into countless smaller rays, raining down like a storm and enveloping Qingyi completely. Seeing his yellow earth giant hand destroyed by Lin Dong's wild demon eye, Qing Ye's expression darkened slightly. He stomped his foot on the ground, and deep yellow primordial energy surged from his body, forming a thick and solid shield of yellow earth above him. Shoo! The gray beams of light rained down like a torrential storm on the earth's shield, riddling it with holes, but they were unable to completely destroy it. Clearly, despite Lin Dong's slight upper hand in the previous exchange, the residual force from his attack was not enough to bring down Qingyi. After all, Qingyi, as the top disciple of Earth Hall, was no ordinary opponent. Defeating him was not going to be an easy task for Lin Dong. As the clouds of dust and gray light slowly dispersed, Lin Dong remained hovering in midair, his wild spirit having dissipated after unleashing its ferocious attack. He looked down and saw Qingyi, still protected by his earth shield, mostly unharmed. Lin Dong's brow furrowed slightly. Qingyi's tenacity was beyond his expectations. Rustle. The earth shield crumbled and collapsed into yellow sand, falling in front of Qingyi as he slowly raised his head. His gaze was sharp as it locked onto Lin Dong's, and after a brief moment of silence, Qingyi suddenly took a deep breath. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he sat down cross-legged on the ground. Two deep yellow hands emerged from his sleeves, and his fingertips began to move swiftly, blood seeping from his fingers. The blood formed into strange crimson runes that floated before him and then sank into the ground, disappearing mysteriously. Qingyi is going to use the earthly sovereign scripture. EngSubs, who had been closely observing Qingyi's actions, raised her brows slightly and spoke softly. Hearing this, Huan's heart tightened. She knew the earthly sovereign scripture was Qingyi's most powerful technique. The fact that he was resorting to it meant he intended to end the match with this decisive move. As Qingyi's strange actions continued, the surrounding arena gradually fell into a hushed silence. Some spectators seemed to recognize what was happening, and their eyes gleamed with excitement. The four great mystical scriptures were legendary within the Tao sect, coveted by all disciples, but only a rare few had successfully mastered them. They were eager to see the power of the earthly sovereign scripture with their own eyes and witness just how strong it truly was. As the blood-red runes sank into the ground and vanished, the entire arena seemed to glow with a faint crimson light. Beneath the earth, a rumbling sound could be faintly heard, like thunder brewing deep underground. In midair, Lin Dong's brows furrowed as he watched the strange scene unfolding below. His eyes flashed, and with a flick of his fingers, a sharp blast of wind shot toward Qingyi. Whoosh! However, just as the blast neared Qingyi, a barrier of deep yellow tinged with crimson appeared around him, effortlessly deflecting the attack. Lin Dong, your talent is indeed remarkable. If you were to stay in the Tao sect for another year or two, perhaps no one among the younger generation could rival you. But that time is not now. Qingyi's blood-stained fingers lowered slightly, but his gaze shifted upward, his pupils glowing with a deep yellow light as he stared at Lin Dong with a proud and obsessive gleam on his face. He had immense confidence in the power of the earthly sovereign scripture. This time, you'll have to slow down your steps. A fierce expression suddenly crossed Qingyi's face, and his fingers moved in a blur, forming intricate hand seals at an astonishing speed. As the seals formed, the ground began to quake violently, as if an earthquake were shaking the entire arena. Earthly sovereign scripture, Earth Dragon God Sealing Mark. His hoarse voice echoed through the air as his hand seals locked into place. The trembling of the earth intensified, and everyone could clearly feel the massive energy converging beneath the ground. All eyes were drawn to the platform where Qingyi sat. Lin Dong's eyes narrowed as he looked down at the ground. His powerful spiritual senses detected the surging energy gathering from all directions beneath the earth. So this is the power of the earthly sovereign scripture, Lin Dong muttered, his expression growing serious. Boom! Just as Lin Dong exhaled, the ground beneath the platform suddenly burst apart. Dozens of streams of deep yellow mixed with crimson surged up like volcanic eruptions, interweaving in the sky. They took the form of several earth dragons, which circled and spiraled around Lin Dong, their fearsome presence sealing off all of his escape routes. Seal! The earth dragons roared through the air, and Qingyi's eyes turned even sharper. With a flick of his hand, the dozen or so earth dragons shot toward Lin Dong with terrifying force. Seeing this, Lin Dong's internal energy surged wildly. Just as he prepared to defend himself, the dragons surrounding him suddenly collided with each other instead of crashing into him. Boom! Boom! A series of low booms echoed, and Lin Dong's confusion only lasted a brief moment before he saw the deep yellow and muddy energies coalescing around him. They formed into a massive, deep yellow sphere, completely encasing him within. As the sphere solidified, crimson light gathered on its surface, forming strange blood-red runes that emitted a sinister power. These runes began to erode Lin Dong's primordial energy from within. The entire arena fell into a stunned silence as everyone stared at the deep yellow sphere trapping Lin Dong. They could sense the terrifying power radiating from the sphere. It was clearly a powerful sealing technique. Once inside, escape seemed impossible. Lin Dong, you've lost. Once trapped within the Earth Dragon God sealing mark, your primordial energy will be rendered useless. Without it, you have no chance of breaking this seal. Qing Yi said coldly, his head held high as he gazed at the yellow sphere in the sky. His words triggered a wave of murmurs from the crowd. The disciples of Wild Hall wore grim expressions, wondering if this was truly the end. Pang Tong and Jiang Hao also looked worried, but unlike the other disciples, they didn't panic. The God sealing mark is indeed an incredibly difficult technique to deal with. Once trapped inside, primordial energy is nullified, which is like losing both arms for most people. Lin Dong might have underestimated the situation. He may not even get the chance to use the great wilderness scripture now. EngShao observed the blood-tinged sphere in the sky, speaking calmly. Huan bit her lip and sighed helplessly. That guy, always so cautious normally, and now he makes a mistake like this. Not far away, Wang Yan's gaze remained fixed on the blood-streaked sphere. After a moment, his body suddenly straightened, and the previously indifferent look in his eyes was replaced by a sharp glint, like the keen edge of an eagle. It was a reaction that only occurred when Wang Yan sensed danger. Inside the sphere, bathed in faint crimson light, Lin Dong slowly closed his eyes. His primordial energy was flowing sluggishly within his body, clearly being suppressed by the seal. However, his lips curved into a faint smile as he thought to himself, my strength is not limited to primordial energy alone. Lin Dong slowly clenched his palm, and a low, almost self-muttering voice escaped from his lips. Then, the surface of his body was suddenly enveloped in a rich green light. Deep within his dantian, the coiling energy of the heavenly dragon burst forth, exploding with force. Like a tidal wave, it surged through his body, flowing into his limbs and bones. A deep, resonant dragon's roar echoed from within Lin Dong's body. Swish! In the dimly lit space within the sealed sphere, Lin Dong's tightly closed eyes snapped open. His once black pupils had completely transformed into a vibrant green, and deep within them, it seemed as though a green dragon was swimming. At this moment, Lin Dong's mastery of the Azure Dragon transformation art had evolved once more.